That this House believes that captains of sinking ships should not be legally liable to be the last man standing on a sinking ship.
Deputy Leader of Opposition. Did you know that in the Titanic, over half the lifeboats were empty? Did you know that in the Titanic, the amount of people that could have been saved was double? And the most heinous fact about this is that the entire time, the entire 2 hours, the captain knew this. The captain had full responsibility of this. What we're going to do is that because of, under the guise of I don't want to create chaos and all, he didn't tell his passengers until the last minute. This is exactly what we want to stop, and this is exactly the problem that they didn't address with on their side. Because we think that at the end of the day, we've proved, and we're going to prove, that we saved more lives. We're going to prove that these shipholders need to be responsible. And that is our stance for today, right? But firstly, 3 issues. The captain's life, and how this has absolutely nothing to do with temporary insanity, in fact makes it worse.
Yeah.
Secondly, no thank you Razak, sit down. Secondly, the idea behind legal liability. And thirdly, this crazy idea from Chicken about how it will incentivize shipholders to suddenly become better, right? But firstly, let's talk about the captain's life and temporary insanity. Is it only Razak? What happened to you two? Please sit down. Look, at the end of the day, we think that captains shouldn't be temporarily insane, right? We think that captains should be trained. And where does this training come from? It's when captains know that when I'm legally liable, you know when most lives are saved? It's before the ship even sinks. It's before the ship even hits the iceberg. When the captain knows that I'm legally liable, he will undergo the training necessary for him to not be temporarily insane during that moment. He will make sure that I know that I'm not going to be temporarily insane and that I have the maximum amount of responsibility, right? But secondly, we told you that about the concept of authority and that he consented to this, right? And he allowed, he told people that I'm ultimately responsible for your life, right? So that's extremely important. But secondly, they had completely wrong characterization. Because firstly, they consented that lifeboats should not be a problem. So what they basically gave you this picture that there's not enough people on the lifeboats, so should we trade the captain or should we trade the passengers? That's not how it happens. This is a matter of timing. When the captain is not sure how much time he has, should he go and check first or should he go on the boat? It's not about the captain suiciding. It's whether we should make sure that these captains take the maximum amount of deterrence possible and make sure that they check the ship first, right? That's what this debate is about. Completely wrong characterization from Razak. He established 5 things, but proved none of them. Shameful. Oh, I'll take the smarter one.
I am. Now, if you really say that if the captain has indeed actually provided maximum security like how you want to picture it, but at the end of the day he still can't save his life, then you are indeed condemning him to a particular suicide.
No, we aren't. Because we think at the end of the day, juries will take this into account. That's why we tried to prove to you negligence on this side of the case, right? We think that at the end of the day, if the captain did all that he could, if the captain made sure that at the very last minute he did it, juries will take that into account. They won't say, they're not going to slaughter this man because he did his best, right? And that's the idea behind our case. Right? So, what did I prove to you? Firstly, it's worse under their proposal. Secondly, it doesn't solve anything. But let's move on to the second issue. And my second issue is legal liability. Because I told you that firstly, he has a responsibility, and secondly, he has this negligence. I already proved to you just now, right? Please sit down. But the second issue is the reliance on the captain. And I gave you in my POI, right, that these people have an inherent incentive to go and make sure that they have enough. Or these people have an inherent incentive that they are safe? And secondly, what's the thought process of people who make ship holders? Do they think, oh, should we improve ships or not? And they think, no, the captains already are fully responsible, so we don't have to save the ship. That's not how it goes. There are already market incentives to make sure there are already market and economical incentives. Better ships cost more, so it makes them more money. Very simple, right? For moving, if that was my destructive, this is my constructive, right? My first idea is about the passengers and the trust between the captain and the passengers. Because we think that ultimately, why so many people die in fires? Why so many people die in all of these things? It's because ultimately they decide to take responsibility into their own hands. And they think that, look, I'm smart enough to deal with this fire, when actually they're not. We think that at the end of the day, if they see that these captains are responsible, right? If they see that these captains are responsible and that this responsibility is given to all of this, then they will sit down, please. They will make sure that these captains, or that they know that they understand that this captain is responsible. And that's why that trust between them and the captain is important, because they won't be taking things into their own hands, because that's what happens when nobody is responsible, right? But secondly, the idea is this. We think that for a crew, for any crew, it's incredibly important for them to have a trust between the captain, right? Because the crew need to know exactly who is in charge. And we think that when the government says clear-cut picture, if all of you are in an accident, this is the guy in charge, right? And given that he has already consented, we think that this is the best guy to be in charge, right? And that, you know why so much manhandling happens? Because the crew says, look, the captain's already abandoning us. What's the point of being on ship? But if you give the captain a reason to be on the ship, then the crew will do everything they can to save the ship. And when the crew do everything they can to save the ship, that's when you save lives, right? That's when the ship has the maximum amount of trust between the government. But finally, my idea behind legal liability. And I told you that ultimately, captains have to pay recompense, right? Because these families of these passengers need to be recompensed. Number one, they need to know who exactly is responsible for this crime. And what you're doing is that you're sidelining this responsibility and telling these families that, look, it was an accident. That's not going to reconcile these families. It was the responsibility of this captain at the end of the day, right? But secondly, we think that if the captain did cause damage, then he must pay. And we prove that because he's responsible, because he's given authority, then he must pay, right? And we think that at the end of the day, these families, they need closure, and they need to be made sure that the state must compensate them, or, make sure that they've done enough, right? So what did they not prove to you today? Number one, they didn't prove that they're going to save more lives. In fact, all they said was that we're going to allow one guy to be selfish, we're going to allow one guy to run away from his responsibility, and we think that's extremely serious. That's why
primary speeches. I now invite the reply speaker from side opposition.
Do you know what the stance was for side government? Their stance was that this captain's life should not be, or this captain's life is sanctity, or this captain's life is extremely important. Do you know how many points or arguments they had to substantiate this? One, temporary insanity. That's it. That's the only thing they argued. Do you know how many responses we had? We had 4. And then Chickers decided to waste his time and say, now we're going to talk about ships, now we're talking about talk about passengers. And we think that at the end of the day, they didn't prove anything at all, right? That happens, Razak, when you waste time establishing things instead of actually arguing. Now, firstly, we think there are 2 points here, right? Firstly, there's the idea behind temporary insanity and whether or not these captains are actually responsible. Secondly, this very small issue on what's best for the ship, right? Now, we think that in terms of temporary insanity, we think that captains, at the end of the day, are like firemen. Temporary insanity is not an excuse. They need the training, they need to be prepared before the ship even capsizes. And where is the incentive
get this training? Where is the incentive? By making them legally liable or by making them scot-free? It's by making them legally liable. Because now that they're legally liable, they will make sure that they have this training, or they will make sure that they know what to do exactly when a capsize happens. And that's how you save more lives, not by making the captain being able to run away, right? But secondly, they didn't engage at all on our idea of the trust between the crew, right? We told you that if the crew know that the captain is going to run away, the crew are going to run away themselves instead of saving the ship. And that's exactly what happens when nobody is responsible. When you have somebody responsible, when you know that this captain is in the ship and that this captain will do his best, that's when you trust the captain. And that's when maximum lives. That was the tangible harm that we proved. I gave you a configuration of harms on our side, right? We told you that people will not be safe. We told you that the captain will run away scot-free. We told you that this at the end of the day, it's bad for these ships, right? But continuing on to the next thing, on legal liability, right? And what was our stance? It was very simple. It was negligence. If the captain can prove to the jurors that he did everything possible, then he can get away with it, right? Or he doesn't have anything to do. And it's extremely easy to prove this. If the passengers see that the moment the ship is sinking, you run onto the boat, and the passengers can testify. If the passengers see, or if the passengers that survive, see that you did everything you could, then very simply, then they will say, then the passengers will say the captain did everything he could, and that captain will no longer have legal responsibility. Wrong characterization, even after spending 5 minutes of your speech characterizing, right? But secondly, what's best for the ship? Because they told you that there will be a reliance on the captain. We think that, number one, we don't think that's necessarily a very, very bad thing. But secondly, we think that people want to save their lives at the end of the day, and they will do unless they have the trust in the captain. Then they will be taking responsibility on themselves and be doing crazy things like jumping off the ship, right? But secondly, what about ship holders? And they told you that now that ship holders know that they will have ultimate responsibility, know that captains have ultimate responsibility, they won't do anything. Look, we already told you, that speaker and second speaker, that ship holders, number one, don't think this way. They have a completely different thought process. And secondly, right, they already have outside incentives to make sure that the ship is safe. It's a good thing if your ship is safe, right? People want to make their ship safe for other people. Because they didn't prove their stance, because we did and we saved more lives, that's why we win this debate.
The final was contested with government side, Sekolah Dato' Abdul Razak. And on opposition, Sekolah Islam Adni. The final's best speaker is Brother Ahmad Syarifuddin from Sekolah Islam Adni. Sekolah. Now I invite Sekolah Islam Adni to receive their prizes.